My name is Callista Harrow, and I wish I could tell you that everything I'm about to say was just the product of an overactive imagination. But every word is true, more true than the family who swore they'd stand by me until the end. When I woke up that morning, the air tasted of celebration. I could hear the dull echo of balloons being popped in the distance, the crinkle of banners being unfolded, the scraping of folding chairs being set up on the backyard lawn. My mother's voice drifted through my open window, sharp and syrupy all at once as she barked orders about table placements and catering trays. None of it was for me. It never had been. The party was for my brother, Luke. Luke, the golden boy. Luke, who never failed a test, who never forgot to smile when there was a camera around, who never, ever let the world see the darkness behind his perfect teeth. I used to adore him. Maybe a small, shivering part of me still does. But what he did, what they all did, was the final crack that broke the dam inside me. I rose from my bed, my feet pressing into the cold floorboards of my childhood bedroom. The posters on the walls were yellowing at the edges now, remnants of a life I had outgrown but never really left. I brushed my hair in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection of a woman who still tried to please everyone, even when they forgot she existed. I padded downstairs, careful not to draw attention to myself. That's the irony, isn't it? When you've been invisible so long, you master the art of moving like a ghost. Mom was standing in the kitchen, overseeing trays of tiny cupcakes adorned with my brother's university logo. I tried to catch her eye, to smile, to offer my help. She didn't look at me. Not even once. "Did you need me to do anything?" I asked, voice so small I hated myself for it. She blinked, her lips pressed together like she'd just tasted something sour. "Just don't get in the way, Callista." That was my role. Don't get in the way. Never get in the way. I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. I wanted to ask about the guest list. Where was my invite? I wanted to ask why they hadn't told me they were throwing him a graduation party when I'd been the one who took out the loans. Yes, that's right. I paid for my brother's entire tuition. Not because I had to. Because I thought that's what family does. I had always been the fixer. Dad left when I was 17, and I stepped into the void he left behind. Luke was only 15 then. Angry, rebellious, clueless about money. Mom was too busy chasing after the next man who promised her a better life to notice that the bills were piling up. So, I worked. I studied, I hustled, I found ways to make extra cash. And when the time came for Luke to go to university, he turned to me with those big watery eyes, promising he'd pay me back. Promising he'd never forget. But people forget. Especially when you make it too easy for them. I stepped outside into the garden, where the tables were dressed in crisp, white linen. The sun was just peeking through the clouds, and the breeze carried the scent of barbecue and fresh-cut grass. I stood there for a moment, trying to picture myself in one of those chairs, laughing, clinking glasses, being a part of the family. "Callista, you're blocking the servers," Mom snapped behind me. She startled me so badly I nearly knocked over a stack of plates. "Sorry," I murmured. She sighed like I was a burden she was too exhausted to bear. Then she walked away, calling out for Luke to come and check the arrangements. When Luke appeared, he was wearing his graduation sash, his hair perfectly styled, his grin aimed at everyone but me. He glanced at me once, just once, and then looked away like I was a stain on the day he wanted to remember forever. That was when I knew. They didn't want me there. They had never wanted me there. So I did what I was best at. I disappeared. I went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. The music downstairs grew louder, laughter swelling and breaking like waves on a shore I could never reach. I could have cried, but I didn't. Instead, I powered up my laptop, opened the folder where I kept every bank statement, every tuition receipt, every promissory note my brother had scribbled on napkins and sticky notes when he was desperate for my help. They thought I'd just forget, that I'd fade into the background like a shadow. But I wasn't a shadow. Not anymore. I drafted the invoice slowly, making sure every penny was accounted for. Tuition, housing, books, extra meals when his stipend ran out, the car I co-signed for him to get to his internships. It all added up. Nearly $70,000. When I finished, I printed it out and slipped it into a crisp, white envelope. I stood by my window for a moment, listening to the party reach its peak. Someone was giving a toast. Probably my uncle, the one who always told me I was too serious, that I'd never find a husband if I kept acting like a man. I walked down the stairs, the envelope clutched tight in my hand. Nobody noticed me. Of course they didn't. The ghost moved among the living, unseen. I stepped onto the patio, the chatter washing over me like static. I found Luke standing with his friends, one arm slung over his girlfriend's shoulders. He looked so happy, so free. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the decorations down, to shatter every glass, to tell them what it had cost me to give him this life. But instead, I walked up to him, pressed the envelope into his hand, and whispered in his ear, "Congratulations, Luke. Here's the bill." His smile faltered for a heartbeat. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. But before he could say anything, I turned and walked away, past the shocked faces, past my mother's horrified expression, past the family who never really saw me. I walked until the music was just a hum behind me, until the wind carried the taste of freedom instead of bitterness. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if they'd pay me back, if they'd hate me forever, if they'd pretend I never existed at all. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care, because I was done being the ghost. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. I didn't stop walking until the last echoes of the party faded behind me. The envelope was gone from my hand, but the weight of $70,000 still pressed against my ribs, each step feeling like I was pulling my life out from under a mountain of unspoken debts. I didn't have a plan. Not really. Maybe that's what freedom feels like when you've spent your whole life asking permission to breathe. I walked down our street, the one with the crooked picket fences and rose bushes that had never quite bloomed the way my mother wanted them to. Each house looked the same, white, tidy, promising some perfect version of suburban life that never existed behind the front door. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't reach for it. I knew exactly who it would be. Mom, Luke, maybe even one of my aunts or cousins asking what the hell I thought I was doing. But for once, their voices didn't own me. I kept walking, past the neighborhood park where I'd pushed Luke on the swings until my arms ached, past the corner shop where I used to scrape together coins for milk when Mom forgot, past the bus stop where I'd stand for hours, waiting to get to the job that paid our bills when Dad ran out on us. The ghosts of all those versions of me were still there, thinner, smaller, more afraid. But the air felt different now. I didn't know where I was going, until my feet brought me to the old diner on the edge of town. Marlene's, the flickering neon sign still proclaimed, though everyone knew Marlene had died 10 years ago and her daughter Jessa ran the place now. The bell above the door jingled when I stepped inside, and the smell of fried food and burnt coffee wrapped around me like an old blanket. Jessa stood behind the counter, her arms tattooed with roses and clock faces. She was wiping down the same section of formica she'd probably cleaned 10 times already. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes softened. "Well, if it isn't the family saint," she drawled, tossing the rag over her shoulder. "Rough day?" I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that didn't feel like mine. "Something like that. Can I just—" "Sit anywhere you want, sugar." She poured me a mug of coffee without asking if I wanted one. That's the thing about Jessa. She never asked stupid questions. She slid the cup toward me, along with a tiny pitcher of cream. "You look like you need to say something you've been swallowing for a decade." I stared at the swirling black liquid, willing my hands to stop shaking. "I did something today." "Good for you." She leaned against the counter, her hip cocked. "About damn time you did something for yourself." I didn't even know how to tell her. How do you explain that you paid for someone's future while burying your own? That you sacrificed so much you don't even remember what it feels like to be whole? "I sent Luke a bill," I said finally, my voice breaking on his name. "For everything. Tuition, rent, books, all of it. Jessa didn't flinch. She just nodded slowly, like she'd known this was coming all along. And they looked at me like I'd stabbed him in the back on his big day, like I'm the villain for wanting what's mine. She laughed then, a warm, rough sound that cracked through my numbness. Sweetheart, you gave them everything they wanted. People don't thank you for that. They hate you for reminding them they needed you. The words settled into me like stones dropped in deep water. I'd always known that in some small, broken part of me, but hearing it out loud made it real. So what now? I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. Now? She shrugged. Now you figure out who Callista Harrow is when she isn't paying for everyone else's mess. Who was I? What did I even want? I thought about the degree I'd abandoned to work double shifts. The apartment I'd never moved into because Luke needed a place closer to campus. The trips I'd dreamed about but never took because there was always another bill to pay. My phone buzzed again. And again. I pulled it out this time. 15 missed calls. 7 texts. Mom, how dare you embarrass your brother like that? Luke, we need to talk. Another one from Mom. Your father would be ashamed of you. I snorted. My father? The one who left us with nothing but final notices and a battered old minivan? I typed out a reply to Mom. I'll send you a copy of the invoice too since you seem so invested. Then I turned my phone off and slid it into my bag. The silence felt like a door slamming shut on a room I'd been locked in for far too long. You got anywhere to go? Jessa asked, eyeing the bags under my eyes like she could read the years behind them. Not really. I guess I'll stay at a motel for a night or two. Nonsense, she said. You'll stay at my place. I've got a spare room upstairs. It's not the Ritz, but it beats paying for a room with bedbugs. I wanted to protest. I'd always been too proud to accept kindness, but the fight in me was tired, so I just nodded, blinking back the sudden rush of tears. Thank you, I whispered. Jessa leaned forward and tapped my mug with her fingernail. Drink up, Callista. You've got a lot of living to do, and it's gonna take all the strength you've got. I stayed at the diner until closing, watching the lights of passing cars blur through the windows. For the first time in years, I didn't have to be anywhere I wasn't wanted. No one was depending on me to fix their life tonight. When Jessa locked up, she led me through the back hallway to a creaky set of stairs. The spare room was small, a single bed, a battered dresser, a window that rattled in the wind. But to me, it felt like the beginning of something I hadn't dared to imagine. I lay on the bed fully clothed, staring up at the ceiling. My mind spun with 1,000 questions. Would Luke pay me back? Would he come after me with Mom, accusing me of destroying his future? Would they ever see me as more than a walking wallet? And under all that noise, a tiny, stubborn voice whispered, "Does it matter?" Sleep found me just before dawn, but it was restless, splintered with half-formed dreams of train stations and long roads stretching into nowhere. I woke up to sunlight slanting across my face and the smell of bacon wafting up through the floorboards. I padded downstairs, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Jessa was behind the counter again, pouring coffee for the early truckers who always stopped by before the highway took them away. "Morning, runaway," she said, sliding a plate toward me. "Eat. You're gonna need it." I sat at the counter, picking at my food when the door jingled open. For a heartbeat, I thought it might be Luke or Mom, but it was someone else entirely, someone I hadn't seen since high school, Mason Brooks. Back then, he was the kid who always sat at the edge of the cafeteria, headphones on, eyes on the world like he didn't quite trust it. We'd talked a few times. Late nights working the same shifts at the gas station, swapping dreams we were too tired to believe in. He looked older now, his hair shaggier, his shoulders broader, but his eyes were the same, sharp and kind all at once. "Callista?" he said, a grin breaking over his face. "Holy shit, it's really you." I blinked. "Mason? What are you doing here?" "Deliveries. I took over my uncle's supply route for the diner. Didn't know you were back in town." "I'm not," I said before I could stop myself. "I mean, I guess I am. Just for now. He raised an eyebrow, sliding onto the stool beside me. Rough night? I laughed. A real laugh this time, low and ragged. You could say that. Jessa plunked a fresh mug in front of him. She's reinventing herself. About damn time, too. Mason looked at me like he could see right through every mask I'd ever worn. Well, if you need any help, you know where to find me. And for the first time in years, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to carry it all alone. But I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Because as I sat there, my phone buzzing again in my bag, I realized that freedom doesn't come without a cost. And my family was about to make sure I paid every last cent. Mason stayed for hours that morning. We talked like we were still 17, sitting behind the gas station on milk crates under flickering floodlights. But we weren't kids anymore. The sharp edges of life had scraped away the softness in both of us. And somehow, that made it easier. I told him everything. I didn't hold back. How I'd paid for Luke's tuition, the years of double shifts, the envelope pressed into my brother's hand while the music roared behind me. Mason listened without interrupting, the same way he always had. When I was done, he didn't say what most people would, that I'd gone too far, that I should have just let it go. Instead, he reached across the sticky diner counter and took my hand. "Good for you," he said simply. "It's about time." And for a moment, I almost believed him. But when I left the diner that afternoon, a knot of dread still coiled in my stomach. I knew my family, knew the way they twisted things around until somehow everything was my fault. I hadn't heard from Luke yet, not directly, but Mom had left me voicemails I refused to play, each one more frantic than the last. Jessa, let me stay in the spare room that night again. I lay awake, staring at the water stain on the ceiling, wondering if Luke was tearing up the invoice or showing it to Mom like proof that I was heartless. Part of me felt guilty, like maybe I had ruined his day, like maybe I was the selfish one. But then I thought about the way he'd looked through me at that party. The way my mother had told me not to get in the way. And the guilt curdled into something sharper. The next morning, my phone vibrated against the pillow. A text from Luke, just 2 words. Meet me. I didn't respond at first. I let him sweat, the same way I'd spent nights awake worrying if he'd blow through the money I sent him. But eventually I texted back, "Where?" We met at the park near the old elementary school. The same one where we used to play on the rusted jungle gym, where I'd watch him chase other kids while I sat alone with my books. When I got there, he was already waiting, pacing near the swings. He looked different. Older, yes, but smaller somehow. Deflated. "Callista," he started when he saw me. His voice cracked, like he hadn't decided whether to shout or beg. "Luke," I said, folding my arms over my chest. "What do you want?" He ran a hand through his hair, his graduation sash nowhere in sight. "Just a hoodie and jeans, like we were kids again." "You blindsided me. You couldn't have waited until after the party?" "You couldn't have told me there was a party?" I shot back. "Or invited me? Or even thanked me for the last 4 years?" His jaw clenched. I was going to pay you back when I got a job. You didn't have to humiliate me like that." "Humiliate you?" I laughed, a harsh sound that made him flinch. "Luke, you humiliated me every time you pretended I didn't exist. Every time Mom told me to stay out of the way while you got celebrated for things you didn't even pay for." He looked down at his shoes, scuffing the dirt with his sneaker. "It wasn't like that, wasn't it?" I stepped closer, forcing him to look at me. "You think you're the only one who deserved a future?" "I had plans too, Luke. Plans I buried so you could have yours." His eyes flicked up to mine, something fragile breaking behind them. "I didn't ask you to." "No," I said, the word burning on my tongue. "You didn't. But you never said no, did you? You never turned down the help. You never once offered to figure it out on your own." We stood there in silence, the distant shouts of kids playing basketball echoing off the cracked pavement. I could see the kid he used to be in his eyes, the one who came to me crying when Dad left, who crawled into my bed at night because the house was too quiet. That kid was gone, replaced by this man who didn't know how to stand on his own 2 feet. "So what now?" he asked finally. "You want me to pay it all back at once? I don't have that kind of money." "I know," I said. "That's not what this is about." "Then what?" His voice was hoarse now, desperate. "What do you want from me?" I almost said I didn't know. But that would have been a lie. "I want you to see me, really see me. I want you to understand that I'm not your personal safety net. I want you to grow the hell up and figure out how to stand on your own." His shoulders slumped. "Mom's furious." "She'll get over it," I said coldly. "Or she won't. That's not my problem anymore." He kicked at the dirt again, his face pale. "Are you cutting us off?" The question hit me harder than I expected. Was I? Could I really walk away from the only family I'd ever had? The ones I'd bled myself dry for? "I'm not cutting you off," I said slowly, "but I'm done sacrificing my life for yours. If you want my help, you'll earn it. And you'll pay it back." He didn't answer, just looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. I left him standing there, the wind rustling the swings behind him. I didn't look back. When I got back to Jessa's, Mason was there again, leaning against the counter with a mug of coffee in his hand. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes flicking over my face like he could read the storm brewing there. "How'd it go?" he asked. "It went," I said, sliding onto the stool beside him. "He wants to be the victim. Mom, too. They don't get it." "They won't," Jessa called from the kitchen. "Not for a while, anyway." "So what do I do now?" I asked. "Keep fighting them?" Mason leaned closer. "You do you, Callista. You can't fix them. You can't make them see what they don't want to see. But you can build something for yourself." "Build what?" I whispered. "I don't even know where to start." Jessa popped her head out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Start with what you wanted before you became the family ATM. You've got a degree half finished, right? Finish it. Take that job you always wanted. Travel. Live." The words cracked something open inside me. A tiny seed of hope I didn't know was still there. I looked at Mason. "You really think I can?" He grinned. The same crooked smile I remembered from those late nights at the gas station. "I know you can. And you won't be doing it alone. Not anymore." I wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. But I also knew my family wasn't going to let me go that easily. And I was right. Because that night, as I lay in Jessa's spare bed, my phone buzzed again. A message from Mom. "You think you're so clever, but you've ruined everything. I hope you're happy." Then another. "We're coming to talk." My heart thundered in my chest. I sat up, staring at the glow of the screen. They wouldn't come here. They wouldn't show up at the diner in the middle of the night, would they? But with my mother, I couldn't be sure. I got up, crept to the window, and peeked through the cracked blinds. The street was empty, just the glow of the diner's neon sign flickering against the pavement. But the threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. I knew then that if I didn't stand my ground now, I never would. So I did something I'd never done before. I blocked my mother's number. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. I woke up before dawn the next morning, the sky outside Jessa's spare room, a bruised purple that bled into the horizon. My eyes burned from a restless sleep, but my chest felt lighter, almost as if something invisible had unlatched from my ribs in the night. Blocking Mom's number hadn't just been an act of defiance. It was a declaration. A line drawn in the sand that even I wasn't willing to cross anymore. For years, I'd believed her words, let them shape me into this obedient daughter who bent until her spine threatened to snap. But now I was someone else, someone I was still learning how to be. I threw on my jeans and the soft jumper Jessa had lent me and crept downstairs to the diner. It was still dark inside except for the humming glow of the soda fridge and the emergency light over the back door. I found Jessa in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hair knotted messily on top of her head as she prepped the morning batter. She looked up when I stepped in, smirk tugging at the edge of her mouth. "Well, look at you. Up before the coffee's even burned. That's progress." I laughed, leaning against the counter. "Couldn't sleep." "Good. Means you're finally too restless to sit in your own mess. You ready to do something with that?" I chewed my bottom lip. "I think so. But I don't even know where to start." Jessa cracked an egg into a bowl with one hand like she'd been born doing it. "Start by telling me what you want. Not what Luke wants, not what your mother wants. You." The question lingered between us. What did I want? My whole life had been a series of choices made for other people. Dad's leaving, Mom's helplessness, Luke's future I had built from my own bones. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Jessa reached over and touched my wrist, her palm warm and flour-dusted. "You'll figure it out, Callie, but you gotta give yourself permission first." I sat with her in the kitchen for an hour, helping prep batter and fold napkins, the quiet comfort of the work settling my mind. By the time the first trucker stumbled through the door at 6, the sun was cracking through the clouds. I poured him coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mason showed up a little after 7, his delivery truck rumbling in the parking lot like a storm rolling in. He grinned when he saw me behind the counter, hair tied back, apron strings dangling around my hips. "You look good here," he said, setting a crate of eggs on the counter. "Don't get any ideas," I teased. "I'm not taking Jessa's job." He laughed, settling onto a stool. "No, but you're figuring it out. You can see it in your face." I poured him a cup and leaned on my elbows across from him. "I don't know, Mason. Everything still feels so raw, like I'm peeling off old skin." "That's how you know you're healing," he said. "It's supposed to sting." We talked a while, about nothing and everything. About his plans to buy his uncle's supply route, about the cabin he'd inherited up north that he'd been fixing up one weekend at a time. He spoke about it so casually, but I could see the light in his eyes. It made me ache with the longing I'd buried under years of sacrifice. "You should come up there sometime," he said suddenly, his eyes locking on mine. "Get out of this place. Breathe a little." "I can't just run away," I said, the words spilling out reflexively. "Why not?" he challenged. "You've been standing still your whole life. Maybe it's time to move." Before I could answer, the door jingled open, and my breath caught in my throat. Luke. Standing there in his same old jacket, his hair a mess like he hadn't slept. He looked around the diner like he half expected me to disappear behind the counter. "Callista?" he said, voice hoarse. "Can we talk?" Mason stiffened beside me, his hand wrapping around his mug. "You want me to stay?" I shook my head, stepping around the counter. "No, I've got this." We stepped outside, the early morning air cutting into my skin like glass. Luke shoved his hands into his pockets, rocking on his heels. She's losing it," he said. "She says you've ruined the family." I barked out a laugh I didn't mean. "Yeah, that's what I do, right? Ruin things." "I'm serious," he snapped, his eyes flashing. "She says she's gonna cut you off. No more family dinners, no more holidays." "She hasn't invited me to a holiday in 3 years, Luke," I said, my voice steady despite the cold knot in my gut. "What am I losing exactly?" He flinched, the truth hitting him harder than he expected. "I'm trying, Cal, I really am. But I don't have the money. I don't even have a job lined up yet." "Then figure it out," I said. I did. At your age, I was working 3 jobs to keep us from losing the house. You'll survive. "It's not that simple," he hissed. "It never is," I shot back. "Grow up." For a second, I saw it. The flicker of shame, the tiny ember of understanding that maybe, just maybe, he was seeing me for the first time. But then it was gone, replaced by that same old wounded boy look. "So that's it?" he asked. "You're just done with us?" "I'm done with being the family wallet," I said. I'm done breaking my back for people who don't see me. He didn't answer. Just turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched against the morning chill. I watched him go until he was just a smear of color disappearing down the street. When I stepped back inside, Mason was still at the counter. He didn't ask what happened. He just handed me a piece of paper. "What's this?" I asked. "A map," he said, grinning. "To the cabin. Come up this weekend. Get your head clear." I wanted to say no, that I couldn't, that there was too much to do, too much to untangle. But when I looked at that simple piece of paper, something inside me cracked open. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt like I was choosing something just for me. The week crawled by like a long exhale I didn't know how to finish. Every day felt like stepping into a new skin, one that didn't know how to bend under everyone else's weight. I still worked at the diner, helping Jessa with the morning rush, pouring coffee for regulars who didn't know my name or my story. There was something healing in that, in the anonymity of being just another face behind the counter. Luke didn't come back. Neither did Mom. The silence I'd once feared so much had settled over my shoulders like a warm blanket. I was starting to realize it wasn't silence at all. It was space. Space I'd never given myself to hear my own thoughts. Mason came by every day, always with something small. A new thermos for my coffee. A packet of wildflowers he swore would grow on my windowsill if I'd just remember to water them. He never pushed, never asked questions I wasn't ready to answer. He just sat with me in the back booth, the hum of the diner wrapping around us like a heartbeat. By Friday, I'd made up my mind. I packed the small duffel bag Jessa lent me. 2 sweaters, a worn pair of jeans, my tattered notebook from university that I hadn't opened in years. It felt like I was packing for more than a weekend, like I was packing up all the versions of myself that had been waiting for me to come back. Jessa caught me by the door as I was leaving. "You sure about this, Callie?" I nodded, my fingers tight around the strap of my bag. "I need it, just for a couple days." She squeezed my shoulder, her thumb pressing into my collarbone. "Good. Go get lost for a while. Maybe you'll find something better than what you left behind." Mason was waiting out front in his battered truck, the one he used for supply runs, but always smelled faintly of pine and old books. He loaded my bag into the cab like it weighed nothing, then opened the passenger door for me. The gesture made something in my chest tighten in a way I wasn't ready to name. The drive out of town was quiet. Fields of yellowed grass rolled by, broken up by the occasional farmhouse or rusted-out barn. I pressed my forehead to the window, watching the world blur and shift until the suburbs and their suffocating sameness disappeared behind us. Mason broke the silence first. "You okay?" "I think so," I said. "I feel like I'm standing on a cliff I built for myself." He laughed under his breath. "Yeah? And what's on the other side?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But for once, I want to jump anyway." He reached over and squeezed my knee, his hand warm through the worn denim. "Good. About damn time." The cabin was smaller than I expected. A single-story structure with peeling paint and a porch that sagged under Mason's weight as he unlocked the door. But inside it smelled of cedar and old books, just like his truck. There was a battered sofa by the fireplace, a tiny kitchen with mismatched mugs, and a bed tucked under a window that looked out over a clearing of pines. "It's nothing fancy," he said, dropping my bag at the foot of the bed. "But it's quiet." "It's perfect," I said, running my fingers over the windowsill, the wood warm from the afternoon sun. We spent that first day doing nothing. Just sitting on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the breeze play with the grass. I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence, to explain myself. Mason didn't need me to be anything other than what I was. When the sun dipped behind the trees, he built a fire in the pit out back. We sat on an old quilt, our shoulders brushing as the flames cracked and hissed. I told him things I hadn't said out loud in years, about the degree I'd left unfinished, the internship I'd turned down because Luke needed rent money, the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I'd ever get a chance to be selfish. He listened like he always did, and when I was done, he just said, "You've got time, Cal. More than you think." And for the first time, I almost believed him. We fell asleep on the sofa that night, the fire's embers painting the walls in soft orange light. I woke up once, tangled in a blanket that smelled like pine and wood smoke, Mason's arm draped heavy over my waist. I didn't move. I didn't want to. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of birds hammering against the windows. Mason was gone, but I found a note on the kitchen table, scrawled in his looping handwriting. "Gone to town for supplies. Take a walk, breathe." So I did. I pulled on my old sneakers and stepped outside, the air sharp and clean in my lungs. The trail behind the cabin wound through the trees, the light slanting in golden shafts that made the world look softer somehow. I walked until my legs ached, until the thoughts in my head had quieted into something that sounded like forgiveness. When I got back, Mason was sitting on the porch steps, a paper bag beside him. He looked up and smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Feel better?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "I do." He patted the step beside him, and I sank down next to him. He pulled a battered thermos from the bag and poured us both coffee. We sat there, passing it back and forth like we were kids again, two broken pieces trying to figure out if we fit together. I didn't know what the next week would bring, or the next month. I didn't know if Luke would pay me back, if Mom would ever call me again, if the life I'd built for everyone else would crumble without me propping it up. But as I leaned my head on Mason's shoulder, the wind threading through the trees like a lullaby, I realized something simple and terrifying and beautiful. I didn't need to know. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The cabin weekend turned into a week. A week turned into 2. Each day stretched out like a blank page, daring me to write something new on it. I woke up with the sunrise, sometimes with Mason beside me, sometimes with him already gone to the town for supply runs, leaving behind notes that made me smile like a girl with a secret. We didn't talk about what we were or what we weren't. There were no promises, no labels, just two people rediscovering the simple sweetness of having no expectations. In the quiet, I found pieces of myself I didn't know were still there. I opened that old university notebook, running my fingertips over the pages of half-written essays and abandoned poems. I started writing again. At first, just words that made no sense, then paragraphs that poured out like rain after a long drought. Mason would read over my shoulder sometimes, offering no critique, just a gentle nod that told me I was allowed to want this, to have this. But the world outside didn't sleep forever. One morning, as we sat on the back steps drinking coffee, Mason's phone buzzed on the railing. He glanced at the screen, then at me. "It's your brother. He's called 3 times. I froze. "How did he get your number?" "I don't know," he said gently. "Do you want me to answer?" I shook my head. "No. Not yet." I should have expected it. Mom had tried every line of attack, guilt, rage, threats of cutting me off. Luke, though, Luke had always been the soft spot in my armor. The one person who could twist my heart just by reminding me of the nights we'd spent huddled together when the power went out, our father long gone, and our mother too drunk to care. But I couldn't pick up yet, not until I was ready to hold the line I'd drawn. So Mason silenced his phone, tucked it into his pocket, and pulled me into his side. We sat like that, our foreheads pressed together, the world beyond the cabin just a ghost in the trees. The next day he found me out by the fire pit, scribbling in my notebook. He sat beside me, his fingers brushing the back of my hand. "I've been thinking," he said. "Dangerous," I teased. He laughed, but his eyes were serious. "When we go back?" "What then?" The question hung between us like smoke. When we go back. Not if. When? "I don't know," I said honestly. "I know I don't want to go back to who I was, but I don't know what that looks like yet." "Then don't decide now," he said. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't disappear again. Not from yourself." His words sank into me like warm rain on dry soil. I closed my notebook and leaned into him, my mouth brushing the corner of his jaw. I promise. That night, curled up beside him under the cabin's rattling tin roof, I dreamed of my mother's house, of Luke standing at the window, calling my name through the glass. But I didn't run to him. I turned and walked into the forest, the trees parting to let me through. When I woke, my chest ached with something like grief, but underneath it a tiny ember of freedom glowed. 2 days later, we packed up the cabin. Mason drove us back into town, the truck rattling over potholes, the sky wide and forgiving above us. We didn't talk much, but his hand stayed on my knee the whole ride. When the diner sign came into view, I felt the first prickle of nerves. Jessa was waiting at the back door, her arms folded, an unlit cigarette tucked behind her ear. "Took you long enough," she said, but her smile betrayed her relief. I hugged her hard, burying my face in her shoulder. "Thank you. For everything." "You're not done yet, Callie," she whispered. "But you're getting there." Inside, the diner buzzed like nothing had changed. Trucker regulars at the counter, old men arguing over baseball scores in the corner booth. But when I slipped behind the counter, it felt different. Like I wasn't hiding anymore. Like I was choosing to be here, if only for now. That night I sat in the tiny room above the diner, my notebook open on my lap. Mason lay sprawled on my bed, flipping through a battered paperback. Every so often, his eyes would drift to me, his grin soft and knowing. A knock rattled the doorframe. I looked up to see Jessa standing there, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You've got visitors," she said. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "Your mother. And Luke." Mason sat up, his face darkening. "You want me to get rid of them?" I shook my head. "No, I need to do this." Downstairs, Mom looked exactly like I remembered. Perfect hair, forced smile, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Luke stood beside her, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched like a reprimanded child. "Callista," Mom said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We need to talk." "Then talk," I said, folding my arms. "Not here," she snapped, her eyes darting around the diner. "Come home." "No," I said. "Say what you came to say." She looked taken aback but recovered quickly. "Luke tells me you're still demanding he pay you back. Do you realize how selfish that makes you look? You're tearing this family apart." I almost laughed. "I'm not tearing anything apart, Mom. I'm finally telling the truth." "The truth?" she hissed. "The truth is, you owe this family too. All those years we gave you a home, raised you." I held up a hand. "You did what any parent should do. And I paid my debt 1,000 times over when Dad left. I kept us afloat. I made sure Luke got the life you wanted for him. And I'm done." Luke shifted beside her. "Callista, please. I can't do this right now. I don't have the money." "Then you'll figure it out," I said, my voice firm but calm. "This isn't about the money, Luke. It's about you standing on your own." Mom's eyes narrowed. "You've changed." "Yes," I said. "I have." There was a beat of silence. Then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You'll regret this. You think Mason and Jessa are family? They'll leave you too. You'll come crawling back." I almost wanted to laugh. Because for the first time, I knew she was wrong. I had already crawled back so many times I'd worn a trench in my own soul. And now I was standing. "Goodbye, Mom," I said. "Goodbye, Luke." Mom turned on her heel, her heels clicking like gunshots across the diner's linoleum floor. Luke lingered for a moment, his eyes searching mine for something. Absolution, maybe. I didn't give it to him. He left without another word. When the door shut behind them, I felt it. That final string snapping, the one that had tethered me to a version of myself I no longer needed. Mason was waiting at the top of the stairs when I came back up. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around me, his lips pressing into my hair. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I closed my eyes, letting his heartbeat drown out the last echo of my mother's voice. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but tonight, in that small room above a battered diner, I finally knew who I was. The next morning felt like waking up after a storm. The air in the tiny upstairs room was warm and still, the quiet broken only by the muffled clatter of plates and the low hum of the diner coming alive below. I lay there for a while, watching the dawn spill soft gold across the cracked ceiling. Mason was still asleep beside me, one arm flung over his face, his chest rising and falling in that steady way that always settled something in me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake him. My feet hit the cold floor, grounding me in this new reality, one where my mother's voice no longer echoed in my ears, where Luke's choices no longer determined mine. It still felt fragile, like a newborn thing I was scared to name out loud. But it was mine. No one could take that back. Downstairs, Jessa was propped behind the counter, hair knotted up, eyeliner smudged from the night before. She looked up when I slid onto the stool across from her. "Well," she asked, "you look different." I let out a breath that tasted like relief. "I feel different," she smirked. "Told you you'd get there. Family show up?" "Yeah." "They did. And they left." "Good." She poured me a mug of coffee, slid it across the counter. "Now what?" The question lingered in the steam rising between us. Now what? For years, my entire life had been laid out like railroad tracks I didn't remember laying down myself. Work. Pay bills. Keep Luke afloat. Pretend Mom's indifference didn't shred me every time she looked right through me. But now there was nothing but open road. "I want to finish my degree," I said, the words so quiet I barely recognized my own voice. Jessa's eyebrows shot up. "Yeah?" I nodded, wrapping my hands around the mug. "I've been looking at programs. Some I can do online, some I'd need to do in person. What's stopping you?" My eyes drifted to the window, the first rays of sunlight catching on the frost that still clung to the glass. "Fear, money, the usual," she snorted. "Girl, you spent a decade making other people's dreams happen on less than that. You'll figure it out." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, the first real laugh of the day. "Yeah, I think I will." Mason found me there an hour later, my laptop open, a dozen tabs blinking with application deadlines and scholarship forms. He dropped a kiss on the top of my head, his hair still mussed from sleep. "You look like trouble," he said. "Maybe I am." I shot back, grinning. He pulled up a stool beside me, peering at the screen. "You're really doing it?" "Yeah, I am." He leaned closer, his shoulder brushing mine. "Tell me what you need." I turned to him, taking in the lines around his eyes, the warm steadiness that had become my anchor in these strange, uncharted weeks. "I need you to keep reminding me I deserve this." His smile was small, but it reached his eyes. "You've got it." The days that followed blurred into a rhythm I hadn't known I was craving. Early mornings at the diner, afternoons at the library or the tiny corner of Jessa's office she'd carved out for me. Mason drove his route, but always circled back by sunset, his grin and his too loud laughter filling the spaces that once felt cavernous and cold. One night, a letter arrived at the diner. I found it tucked under the counter, my name scrawled across the front in Luke's messy handwriting. I carried it upstairs like it was a bomb, my heart thundering in my chest. Mason was there when I tore it open. He didn't say a word, just sat on the edge of the bed while I read. It wasn't an apology. Not really. Luke's words were clumsy, careful, like he was still afraid of what they meant. He wrote about job interviews that hadn't panned out yet, about staying with a friend because Mom had made the house too tense to breathe. He didn't ask for help, though. Not once. Instead, at the bottom of the page, he'd written, "I don't know how long it'll take, but I'll pay you back, I promise." My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I folded the letter and tucked it into my notebook, the place where my old life and my new one now lived side by side. Mason caught my chin, tilting my face to his. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I really am." Spring came late that year, but when it did, it felt like a second chance. The rose bushes outside the diner bloomed in wild, reckless reds, untamed in the way my mother always hated. Some nights I'd catch Jessa standing out there with her cigarette unlit between her fingers, staring at them like they were a promise she didn't dare speak aloud. One morning, Mason handed me an envelope. "It's not much," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "But it's a start." Inside was a check. Money he'd set aside from his routes, from selling off old equipment he didn't need anymore. "For your tuition," he said when I looked up at him. "Or books. Or whatever you want." I shook my head, the tears coming fast now. "Mason, you don't have to." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "I want to. You've spent your whole life paying for other people. Let someone bet on you for once." I threw my arms around him, burying my face in his shoulder. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for not letting me disappear." He laughed, his breath warm against my hair. "Not a chance." That night, we drove out to the old train tracks that ran behind town. We sat on the hood of his truck, the sky above us wide and full of stars, our hands tangled together. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice barely a breath in the quiet. Mason looked at me, his grin soft and sure. "Whatever you want, Callie. Whatever you want." For once, I didn't flinch at the uncertainty. I let it wrap around me like a blanket, warm and wild and new. I didn't know if my family would ever forgive me, or if I'd ever want them to. I didn't know if Luke would send that first payment, or if my mother would ever say my name without bitterness dripping from her tongue. But I did know this. I was done paying for things that weren't mine to carry. I was done being the ghost at someone else's party. I was alive, and I was enough. And this time, the future was mine. The days blurred into a season. One would later remember as my first real spring. It was strange, waking up without a weight pressing down on my chest, without my mind immediately jumping to who needed what from me before I'd even brushed my teeth. The air smelled different too, like fresh rain and cut grass, a scent I hadn't noticed in years because I'd been too busy holding my breath. I filled my hours with small, steady acts of rebellion. I filled out applications for universities that had waitlisted me years ago, reopening doors I'd once bricked shut with excuses. I met with an advisor at the local college, her office cluttered with paperbacks and old candy wrappers. She looked at my transcripts like they were relics from another lifetime. When she said, "You've still got credits here. You can finish faster than you think," my lungs felt too big for my chest. After work at the diner, I dragged Mason to the tiny library above the old city hall, spreading my notebooks and battered laptop across a splintered wooden table. He'd pretend to read, but I'd catch him watching me instead, a small smile pulling at his mouth like he was witnessing something sacred. Maybe he was. Maybe I was. One night, while we were packing up, I found a folder at the bottom of my bag. Old pay stubs, the invoice I'd handed Luke at his party, receipts that felt more like tombstones for every piece of myself I'd given away. I held them up to the dusty desk lamp. The ink faded, but the truth loud enough to make my hands tremble. "You should burn them," Mason said behind me, his voice soft but certain. "Why?" I asked. "They're proof." He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "You don't need proof anymore. You survived it. That's enough. We did it in the diner's parking lot." Jessa stood beside us, flicking her lighter like a priest with a candle at a vigil. The papers curled and shriveled in the old coffee tin we used as a makeshift fire pit. Smoke wrapped around my fingers like ghosts I was finally releasing. When the last corner turned to ash, Jessa smirked and nudged my shoulder. "Told you you were more than what they took from you." I wanted to believe her. I think in that moment I did. Mason drove me back to the cabin that weekend. We didn't talk much on the drive up. The silence was the good kind, the kind that hummed in my veins instead of pressing on my throat. The cabin was exactly as we'd left it, dusty, drafty, and brimming with the promise of a life that was finally ours to imagine. We sat on the porch steps for hours that first night, wrapped in a blanket that smelled like wood smoke and old memories. He told me about his father's fishing trips, about the routes he wanted to expand, about how maybe, someday, this place could be more than a weekend escape. "What about you?" he asked, brushing my hair from my face. I thought about it, about the question I'd never let myself answer because it had always been a luxury. "I want to finish school," I said, "maybe write something real, something that matters. I want to sit in a coffee shop in the middle of a city I've never been to and not wonder who's going to call me home. I want to want things without apologizing for them." His grin was a sunrise I hadn't known I'd needed. Sounds like a plan. That night, we fell asleep, tangled on the old sofa, our dreams spilling into each other's like watercolors on wet paper. In my sleep, I saw Luke again, standing on the edge of the yard, his hands in his pockets, his face a ghost I no longer feared. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. When I woke, the guilt that usually sat like a stone in my gut was gone. The next week, an envelope arrived at the diner. It wasn't from Luke this time. It was from a community scholarship program I'd forgotten I'd even applied to. Jessa pressed it into my hand before I'd even stepped inside, her grin wide and wicked. "You're going to want to read that upstairs," she said. I tore it open at my little table by the window. The letter inside was plain, almost clinical, but my eyes snagged on the words that mattered. "We're pleased to award you." My breath caught, and my eyes stung so hard I had to press the heel of my hand against them. I didn't even hear Mason come up the stairs. He sat beside me, his hand covering mine as I choked out the words. "It's enough. Not all of it, but enough to start." He laughed, pulling me into his arms. "Look at you," he whispered into my hair. "Look at what you're doing." I was doing it, not dreaming about it, not sacrificing it for someone else. Doing it. A week later, I found myself standing in the middle of a campus I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Students brushed past me, their backpacks slung low, their laughter echoing across the quad. I felt like a ghost at first, like I'd slipped through some tear in the universe back into a life I'd left behind. But when I walked into the admissions office, the receptionist didn't look at me like an intruder. She looked at me like I belonged there. "You're back," she said, flipping through my file. "I'm glad." I sat in that cramped office for 2 hours, filling out forms and setting up a payment plan, my hands trembling each time I signed my name. When I stepped back out into the sunlight, my breath felt bigger than my chest could hold. I pulled out my phone, took a picture of the campus sign, and texted it to Mason. His reply came back instantly. "Damn right." That night, back at the diner, I found Jessa sitting outside by the rose bushes, her unlit cigarette twirling between her fingers. I sank down beside her, the gravel biting into my jeans. "You did it," she said, her voice low. "I did," I whispered. She leaned her head against mine, the two of us watching the last of the sunset bleed into dusk. "So what now, Callie? What's next?" I thought about it, about the blank pages ahead, about the people I'd carry with me and the ones I'd finally learned to let go of. "I don't know," I said, a grin pulling at my lips. "But for the first time, I can't wait to find out." And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost at someone else's party. I felt like the guest of honor at my own life. Yeah, there's something no one tells you about starting over. It's not always a clean break. It's messy and jagged, full of days when the new life you're building feels like it's stitched together with threads so thin it might snap if you breathe wrong. But somehow, you keep breathing. I woke up every morning in that tiny room above the diner, with sunlight cutting through the curtains, the hum of Jessa's early morning prep work downstairs, and Mason's soft snore when he stayed the night. My laptop sat on the desk in the corner, blinking with deadlines and reading lists and drafts I was terrified to submit. But every time I thought about giving up, I reminded myself, no one else gets to pull me under anymore. I was back in school for real now. Real classes, real deadlines, real nights falling asleep with textbooks balanced on my chest. I worked the diner's morning shifts and sometimes the late lunch rush, wiping down counters and filling coffee cups for regulars who called me kiddo, like they hadn't watched me grow up here in the shadows. Now they saw me, not as the girl who gave everything away, but as someone who was fighting for herself. One night, when the air was thick with summer's promise, Jessa cornered me behind the counter. She flicked her cigarette into the sink and jabbed a flour-dusted finger at my shoulder. "You're burning out," she said flatly. "Don't look at me like that, Callie Harrow. You've been here double shifts all week and you've got a paper due tomorrow." I opened my mouth to protest, but she cut me off with a sharp click of her tongue. "Nope, go. Now, I'll cover your tables." "Jessa, don't argue with me. Go write your future." I nearly cried right there by the sticky coffee pot, but instead, I hugged her so tight she cursed under her breath and pushed me away. "Don't get sappy. Get gone." I walked through the front door with my notebook under my arm and Mason's truck headlights already flicking on in the parking lot. He'd shown up without my asking, like he'd felt me coming undone from a town away. He didn't say a word, just reached across the bench seat and squeezed my hand. "Cabin?" he asked. "Cabin," I said, my voice cracking. We drove through the dark with the windows down, the hum of tires on old asphalt, and the smell of pine wrapping around us like a lullaby. When we got there, I dragged my backpack inside and dropped it on the old table by the fireplace. "Get to work," Mason said, lighting the fire like he'd done 100 times before. "I'll keep the coffee coming." I did. I wrote until my eyes blurred, until my fingers cramped around the cheap pen I'd dug out of the bottom of my bag. Mason read over my shoulder when I asked him to, offering his quiet nods, his quiet pride, like it was the most natural thing in the world. When I finally hit submit on my laptop, the relief tasted sweeter than anything I'd ever given away for someone else's sake. Mason pulled me into his lap, buried his face in my hair and whispered, "I'm so damn proud of you." I fell asleep on the couch with my head on his chest, the fire crackling, the future humming somewhere just beyond the cabin walls. But the world has a way of testing you the moment you think you've got it figured out. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls. "Luke," and one from an unfamiliar number. My stomach twisted, but I pressed play on the voicemail anyway. "Callista? It's me. It's Mom. Please, just call me back." I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. After months of silence, after the last venomous goodbye, this was how she chose to crawl back? A weak, cracked voice on my voicemail? I played it again, Mason watching from the kitchen doorway. "You gonna call her?" he asked gently. I shrugged, my throat dry. "I don't know." I didn't, but I couldn't stop thinking about it all the way back to town. The dirt roads unspooling under Mason's tires like a film reel of old memories. I couldn't burn fast enough. Back at the diner, I tried to bury myself in the clatter and chatter of the lunch rush. But when I stepped out back to take the trash to the bins, I found her, Mom, standing there by the rose bushes she'd always hated. Her hair was pulled back too tight, her purse clutched in front of her like a shield. "Callista," she said, her voice small. I tried calling. I held the trash bag tighter, its weight suddenly insignificant compared to the heaviness in my chest. "What do you want, Mom?" She flinched at the word Mom. Maybe because I hadn't said it since that day at the diner when she'd hissed that I'd regret everything. I wanted to see you. I wanted to talk. I dropped the trash bag into the bin with a dull thud and crossed my arms. "So talk." She shifted on her heels, her eyes darting to the diner door like she expected Jessa or Mason to come barreling out at any moment. "I know I wasn't fair to you. I wasn't kind. But you have to understand, I was doing the best I could." I almost laughed. "The best you could? Mom, you let me break myself in half for Luke. You let me be his mother while you pretended we were some perfect family." "I didn't ask you to," she snapped, her eyes flashing. "I didn't ask you to carry all that." "But you let me," I said, my voice quiet now. "You let me because it was easier than facing your own mess." She deflated then, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own shame. "I'm trying now. I'm trying with Luke. He's working. He sent you that first payment, didn't he?" "Yeah," I said. "He did. He wants you to come home. We could be a family again. The word lodged in my throat like a stone. Family. I thought about the small family I'd built. Jessa, who'd thrown me out of the diner when I needed it most. Mason, who sat up with me while I chased my dreams. Even the old regulars who asked about my classes now, who called me college girl with a wink. I am home, I said. Right here. She stared at me, eyes wide and wet, like she couldn't quite process that the little girl she'd kept under her thumb had learned how to stand. You're really not coming back? I never left, I said softly. I just stopped letting you decide who I'm allowed to be. For a heartbeat, I almost reached for her. Almost let that old reflex pull me back under. But I didn't. She turned and walked away, her shoulders hunched, the rose bushes brushing her arm as she went. When I stepped back inside, Jessa raised an eyebrow from behind the counter. Good talk? Good enough, I said, pulling off my apron. Mason met me by the coffee machine, his smile quiet but warm. You okay? I nodded, a laugh bubbling up like sunlight through dark water. I'm better than okay. I'm free. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's permission to be exactly that. There's a peculiar ache that comes with realizing you're finally untangled from the people who once taught you how to breathe. It's not the sharp stab of betrayal or the constant dull throb of resentment. It's softer, like pressing a bruise just to remind yourself it's healing. Summer rolled in slow and heavy, wrapping the town in sticky warmth and the buzz of cicadas. I settled into the strange new normal of splitting my days between textbooks and coffee cups, lectures and late-night heart-to-hearts, with Mason under the halo of the diner's flickering neon sign. I'd catch Jessa watching me sometimes, her eyes crinkling at the edges, cigarette dangling unlit from her fingers. She never said it outright, but I knew she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Maybe I was too, because life had a way of circling back with old debts and colder winds. One afternoon, in the lull between the lunch rush and the early dinner crowd, I found a letter wedged into my locker behind the kitchen. The envelope was cheap, the address scrawled in Luke's lopsided handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper, payment enclosed, he'd written, and true to his word, 2 folded bills dropped into my palm, $120. A drop in the ocean, but it was more than the promise. It was the proof. You okay? Mason asked later when I showed him. I nodded, my fingers brushing the edge of the bills. Yeah, he's trying. And that's enough for you? I thought about it. About the years when trying would have been enough to keep me shackled to a family that only loved me when I was useful. But now? It's enough for him, I said, and that's enough for me. Mason pressed a kiss to my temple. Proud of you, Callie. Nights at the cabin became more frequent, a soft retreat when the noise of town got too loud. We'd pack sandwiches and battered textbooks and drive out past the last flickering street lamps, the truck's radio crackling with old songs we both pretended to know the words to. It was there, in that crooked little house that smelled like pine and old paperbacks, that I let myself dream bigger than I ever had. I'd write for hours while Mason tinkered with broken equipment out in the shed. Sometimes he'd come in, dirt under his nails, lean over my shoulder and whisper, "You're doing it, you know. You're building it." One night, as we sat on the back porch watching a thunderstorm roll over the hills, he looked at me with that same steady gaze I'd come to rely on. You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to be strong for everyone else? I laughed, the sound swallowed by a crack of thunder. I don't know how not to be. Try, he said. Just for tonight. Just be Callie. I leaned into him, the wind tugging at my hair, and let myself be small and selfish in the safest arms I'd ever known. Back in town, word got around that I was the one who sent her brother a bill. People love their small-town stories, and mine had grown its own crooked roots. Some looked at me with pity, others with something like admiration. A few whispered behind their hands when they thought I couldn't hear. But I did, and I didn't care, because each whisper reminded me I'd survived the worst of their opinions. I wasn't invisible anymore, and even if they couldn't understand it, I didn't need them to. One Sunday, after a quiet breakfast rush, I caught Jessa staring at me through the pass window. "When's the last time you took a real break?" she asked. I shrugged. "The cabin counts." Nah, she said, popping her gum. That's running away. I mean, a break. No books, no orders. Just you. And Mason, I teased. She grinned. Yeah, him too. So we did it. 2 weeks later, Mason and I scraped together enough gas money to drive south, past the county line and the flickering neon sign that had kept me safe. We found a cheap motel by the beach, one with threadbare towels and sand that crept into every corner. We lay on our backs on the salt-crusted sheets, the ceiling fan wobbling dangerously above us, and planned futures we might never have but would chase anyway. We could open a place, Mason said one night, his voice a rumble against my collarbone. A proper one. Diner up front. Maybe a little bookstore in the back. Coffee all day. Breakfast at midnight. I laughed, tracing circles on his chest. And who's gonna run the books? You, he said without missing a beat. You'd keep us honest. We stayed there until the money ran thin, until the real world tugged us back north. But even when the ocean was nothing more than a dream in my rearview mirror, I carried it with me, a reminder that I was allowed to want more. Back home, the letters from Luke came slower but steadier. $20 here, $50 there. Never enough to make me whole, but more than I'd expected. Sometimes he'd slip in a line or two about his new job, a woman he was seeing, how Mom was trying. I read them all, folded them into the back of my old notebook, and moved on. One evening I was closing up the diner when Jessa slid a small box across the counter. Open it, she said. Inside was a key. Old, brass, heavy in my palm. What's this? I asked, my voice tight. Your table in the back? The one you always hog for your books? She said, her grin softening. It's yours now, a corner office, just for you. Keep writing, Callie. And when you're ready, that bookstore idea? We'll figure it out. I laughed, blinking back tears that didn't feel like old grief but something sweeter. You mean it? Kid, she said, flicking my forehead. You've been building your own table your whole life. Took you long enough to claim it. When I stepped outside that night, Mason was leaning against his truck, moonlight caught in the mess of his hair. He looked at the key in my hand and just smiled. One day, he said, you're gonna look back at this place and realize it wasn't your cage. It was your runway. I slid the key into my pocket, leaned up on my toes, and kissed him hard enough that the past felt like it had finally let me go. And maybe, just maybe, it had. I kept the brass key in my pocket like a talisman, the cool weight of it grounding me through the whirlwind that followed. School ramped up, deadlines stacked on deadlines until my old habit of sacrificing sleep returned with a vengeance. But this time, it felt different. Each all-nighter wasn't for someone else's comfort or survival. It was for me. For the version of Callie Harrow I'd buried beneath years of unspoken family debts. Mason knew when to pull me back from the brink. He'd show up at the diner with a greasy bag of takeaway or drag me out to the cabin for a single night, just so I could remember what the world sounded like when it wasn't demanding more of me. Sometimes I caught him scribbling notes in a battered notebook of his own, dreams of expanding his supply route, blueprints for the roadside diner and bookstore we talked about under the hush of pine trees and starlight. Luke's payments trickled in like uneven rain. 20 here, 50 there. He never wrote more than a line or two on the scraps of paper that held the bills. Hope this helps, he'd scrawl, or almost got enough for the next one. I didn't expect more from him now. The sting had faded, replaced by a quiet understanding that some debts never really close, and some forgiveness you have to grant yourself first. Mom called once more. Her voice cracked through my phone speaker, softer than it ever was when I was young. I saw Luke. He says you're doing well. I just wanted you to know I'm proud. The word felt like a pebble dropped into a deep well. Small ripples, distant echoes. I thanked her, hung up, and didn't feel the old squeeze of guilt that used to follow every conversation. Progress, I thought. Even if it was just mine. The regulars at the diner became my quiet cheerleaders. Mr. Leary, who nursed his bottomless mug of coffee and crossword puzzles every morning, started leaving me newspaper clippings about scholarships and writing contests. The college kids who stumbled in for midnight pancakes sometimes asked about my classes, their tired eyes reflecting the same restless hope I saw in the mirror. One evening, I sat at my corner table, my table now, with its crooked leg and scratched-up surface, that felt like home more than any kitchen I'd ever scrubbed clean. My laptop hummed with a blinking cursor. Next to it, a letter from my advisor. Draft accepted. Let's talk next steps for publication. I'd written something real. Something that mattered. My fingers hovered over the keys, a strange ache blooming in my chest. For so long, I'd given every word, every breath, every piece of my heart to people who didn't see me. Now, each sentence I wrote was another stitch binding me to a future I'd chosen for myself. Jessa knocked on the table edge, breaking my trance. Earth to Cali. You planning on moving in back here? I laughed, shoving my hair out of my face. Maybe. Feels safer than anywhere else. Safe is overrated, she said, lighting her unlit cigarette for once and taking a drag. When you're done hiding, the bookstore idea's still on the table. Mason slipped in behind her, leaning his elbows on my chair back. She's not hiding, she's building. Jessa raised an eyebrow, but she didn't argue. She just winked and drifted off to the kitchen. You okay? Mason asked, pressing his lips to my temple. I'm good, I said. More than good. He pulled the brass key from my pocket and twirled it between his fingers. So, I've been thinking. Dangerous, I teased, echoing our old joke. Hilarious, he deadpanned, but the corner of his mouth quirked up. I've been looking at a place. Not just the diner expansion. An old building out near the tracks. Good bones, good spot for both the diner and that bookstore you keep pretending you're not dreaming about. My pulse thudded in my throat. You're serious? Callie, we've been serious since the day you handed your brother that bill, he said. You're not just surviving anymore. You're building. Let's build this too, together. Fear prickled at the edges of my excitement. What if we failed? What if the past reared up, laughing at my audacity to want more? But Mason's eyes, that steady warmth, anchored me. Okay, I whispered. Let's do it. He whooped so loud that Jessa yelled from the kitchen, Keep it down back there! But even she couldn't hide her smile when she poked her head out and saw us grinning like fools. We spent nights sketching out ideas on the back of napkins, what the storefront would look like, where the shelves would go, how the coffee counter would wrap around the old brick wall that still smelled faintly of motor oil from decades past. Mason made calls to contractors. Jessa flexed her rusty bookkeeping muscles. And me? I started scribbling ideas for readings, workshops, maybe even a small scholarship for local kids who'd grown up like I did. Too busy surviving to dream. One evening, just as the first leaves turned from green to burnished gold, Luke showed up at the diner. He looked older, less like the boy I'd rescued, and more like a man who'd learned the hard way that life didn't owe him softness. Hey, he said, standing awkwardly by my table. Hey? I echoed, closing my laptop. He pulled out the chair across from me, drumming his fingers on the scarred wood. I got a job, full-time, union gig. It's not much, but that's good, Luke, I said, and I meant it. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and pushed it across to me. Last payment. I stared at it, my throat tight. You didn't have to. Yeah, I did, he said, meeting my eyes for the first time in too long. You made me face it, and I'm glad you did. We sat in silence, the noise of the diner washing around us. There were things we'd never say to each other. Apologies too big to fit in one conversation. Regrets we'd both have to carry alone. But when he stood and hugged me, clumsy, brief, but real, I felt something loosen in my chest. Take care of yourself, okay? I said when he pulled back. You too, he said. And thanks, Callie, for everything. After he left, I sat there with the envelope unopened for a long while. I didn't need to count the money. It wasn't about the amount anymore. It was about the line drawn under a chapter that had once defined me but didn't anymore. That night, Mason and I drove out to the new building. It was still a shell, exposed beams, cracked windows, dust dancing in the glow of his flashlight. But standing there, our breath clouding the cold air, I saw it. The tables, the shelves, the small corner where my writing desk would sit. Mason slipped his arm around my waist, his voice low in my ear. "You ready?" I looked at him, at the walls that would hold our reckless dreams, at the empty space where I'd write my next stories. "Yeah," I said, pressing my hand to the heartbeat of it all. "I'm ready." And for the first time, ready didn't feel like a wish. It felt like a promise. Opening day came on a cold breath of early spring, the kind that tricked you into thinking winter might never truly let go. But inside the new shop, the air hummed with warmth and the quiet thrill of possibility. I stood behind the counter, our counter, a slab of reclaimed wood Mason had sanded and sealed himself. Shelves lined the walls, still half bare but already brimming with promise. Paperbacks we'd rescued from thrift stores, donated boxes from the local library's storage room, and a handful of new titles I'd chosen like seeds I hoped would bloom in the right hands. Beside the shelves, the tiny cafe pulsed with the aroma of coffee so rich it made my head swim. Jessa's old diner sign hung above the pastry case, a wink to the place that had given me my first taste of freedom. And behind the register, taped to the wall, was that brass key, framed and polished, a reminder that I'd never again lock myself inside someone else's dream. Mason bustled between tables, balancing mugs and greeting our first customers like he'd been born for this. His grin found me every few minutes, that look that said, "Look, Callie, look at what you did. I thought I'd feel nervous, exposed." But the only thing thrumming under my skin was a quiet certainty. Not that it would be perfect or easy, just that it was mine. Ours. People trickled in all morning, truckers from Jessa's diner. Students from my old college who remembered me from late-night study sessions. Neighbors who'd whispered about the girl who sent her brother a bill and now came to see if the story was true. They sipped coffee and ran their fingers along the spines of second-hand books, their murmurs weaving a tapestry of belonging I'd spent years pretending I didn't crave. Luke showed up just before noon. He stood by the doorway for a long moment, his hands stuffed in his pockets like he didn't quite know how to step across this new threshold. I caught his eye and tilted my head, a silent invitation. He came to the counter, his gaze drifting across the pastries, the register, the battered donation jar marked Local Literacy Fund, another tiny rebellion I'd promised myself when we started planning this place. "Looks good," he said finally, his voice low. "Thanks," I said, handing him a mug of coffee. "On the house?" He shook his head. "No more handouts." I smiled. "Then consider it an investment in your sister's future empire." He laughed, a rough, uncertain sound that still felt like progress. "Mom wanted to come. She chickened out." "That's okay," I said, and I meant it. "She'll come when she's ready, or she won't." Luke took a sip, his eyes scanning the shelves. "You did it, Callie." "We did," I said softly. "In our own ways." He didn't stay long, just enough to tuck a few bills into the donation jar and promise to come back for the poetry reading next month. When he left, I let the door swing shut behind him without the familiar ache that used to settle in my bones every time he walked away. The afternoon rush was a beautiful kind of chaos. People flipping through books, kids scribbling in the coloring corner Mason had built out of old crates. Jessa popped in during her break, a tray of leftover muffins balanced on her hip. "For the freeloaders," she said, dumping them onto our pastry rack with a grin. "Place looks good, kid." "It feels good," I said, and she just winked, her eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. As dusk wrapped around the building, Mason flipped the open sign to closed. We sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the counter, the cash drawer balanced between us, counting our first day's earnings in the hush of settling laughter and cooling coffee pots. "How'd we do?" he asked. I flipped through the bills, the coins, the crumpled receipts. "Better than I dreamed." He leaned back against the counter, his hand brushing mine. "You know this is just the beginning, right?" "I know," I said. "But for once, I'm not terrified." We locked up together, doors, register, lights flicked off one by one until only the glow of the key on the wall remained. I pressed my fingertips to the glass, watching our reflections shimmer against the darkened street. Mason slipped his arms around my waist from behind, his breath warm against my ear. "What's next, Callie Harrow?" I thought about the countless times I'd asked myself that question in the darkness of rooms I didn't choose. Rooms where I'd traded my worth for the promise that one day I'd be seen. "More," I whispered. "Next is more. More books. More coffee. More chances for people like me to walk through that door and believe they're worth it." He grinned, spinning me around until the brass key caught the light like a blessing. "You are worth it. You always were." That night, we drove out to the cabin, our truck bed rattling with leftover pastries, and the hum of our favorite songs. The road unspooled before us, every mile a reminder that the past didn't get to dictate the shape of our tomorrows. We tumbled onto the cabin's porch, laughing as the wind picked up and rattled the old screen door. Inside, we lay tangled on the battered sofa, the scent of pine and possibility settling over us like an old quilt. "Do you think they'll understand?" I asked, my voice barely a breath in the dark. "Who?" Mason murmured, half asleep already. "The people who still think I'm the girl who ruined her brother's big day." He pulled me closer, his heartbeat steady against my ear. "Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. Doesn't change what you built, doesn't change who you are." I let his words soak through me, an antidote to every "not enough" I'd ever carried. The wind rattled the cabin's windows, but I wasn't afraid. Because the storms would come, and so would the whispers. But the doors I'd once slammed shut on myself were wide open now. And the life I'd dared to claim was mine, flaws and all. As sleep tugged me under, I pictured the counter back at the shop. The shelves we'd fill one book at a time. The brass key gleaming like a promise that I'd never again pay for a seat at a table that didn't want me there. I had built my own table. And if someone like me, someone who'd learned to survive in the shadows, could do that, maybe someone out there would hear this story and believe they could too. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.